We're going to be looking at leveling up your innovation. To go over my background quickly, so I started off in the games industry at EA 11 years ago, working on Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. So I was a level integrator, which kind of meant putting lots of different content into the game and scripting the missions, sort of working with all different departments on the team. I then went to Lionhead Studios, where I worked on Fable 2, Milo and Kate, and Fable The Journey, doing a similar sort of role. I've also worked at Marmalade, Sony, and Kuju, and now I've founded my own studio, Sketchbook Games. To give you a summary of what we're going to be looking at in this talk, we're going to start off by going over the creative process, 4 secrets to making great games, although this also applies to pretty much any creative project, and creativity through productivity, and 3 tools to help you innovate. So, in the games industry, lots of people talk about indie-pocalypse at the moment, and the fact that we've kind of got all these great tools and technologies that make it easier than ever before to make your own games, but that means that there's so many games being released these days that it's very hard to stand out. So people have all these scary graphs and things, and it kind of makes you think that, what's the point in making your own game when it's so tricky to succeed these days? But I don't think we're at the end of a golden era. I think we're at the beginning of one. And I think lots of different industries have had this as well, like film, music, photography, animation. The barriers to entry come down. The kind of expensive software becomes freely available. The sort of hardware that's really difficult to get hold of becomes commonplace, and it doesn't ruin the industry. It kind of creates all kinds of new innovation, and we see really amazing products coming out of it. So with all the barriers to entry coming down now, really the only thing that's going to hold you back is you. Like, do you know the kind of thing you want to make? Do you have something in mind that people are going to want to experience? And do you have the sort of passion and commitment to see it through? So innovation is one of the ways that you can help your products to stand out and get noticed. And so what actually is innovation? Well, the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines it as the act or process of introducing new ideas, devices, or methods. But if innovation is creating new things, then creativity is actually how you go about doing that. When I'm creating something, I'd like to start off by trying to get inspiration from lots of different sources. Kind of see it like cooking. You've got all your different ingredients, and you can kind of choose what you want to make something that hopefully people are going to find really delicious. But one thing with innovation is, I think often people get kind of fixated on something brand new, never seen before, but often innovations kind of combine lots of different things in interesting ways, and it might be using things from different fields, or combining things in a way that's never been done before. So the famous phrase, good artists borrow, great artists steal, I think kind of applies pretty well here. Here's a quote I really like. The good game designer welds their theft into a whole of feeling which is unique, utterly different from where it was torn. The bad designer throws it into something which has no cohesion. And of course that was by T.S. Eliot. Okay, well perhaps he wasn't talking about game design, he was talking about poetry, but I think this applies to pretty much any industry. There's a really great YouTube series by Kirby Ferguson called Everything is a Remix, when he looks at all different types of media and how they're sort of always borrowing and combining from lots of different areas. So in it he looks at like the iconic Star Wars title sequence, which I always thought was sort of unique to Star Wars, so I was very interested to see that it was done 50 years before in Flash Gordon. And he also goes on to quote Isaac Newton saying, if I have seen further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants, which he said in 1676, but that itself is a quote from something 500 years earlier about dwarfs on the shoulders of giants. Kirby Ferguson goes on to talk about how the three basic elements of creativity are copy, transform, and combine, which incidentally are the same techniques that evolution has used to create us and all the other amazing creatures. So he basically states that by connecting ideas together, creative leaps can be made. It's a great series, definitely worth checking out. And Nintendo has kind of put this into practice really well with the Wii. They took loads of sort of really standard, cheap, off-the-shelf components, and they combined it to make the Wii and its motion sensing technology, which people hadn't really experienced before in that kind of way. And the console sort of took the world by storm. So when you're borrowing from stuff and getting inspiration, you just want to make sure that you're doing things in a different way, or you're combining it with different things so that it is something unique. So for the creative process, it's often best to innovate as early on as possible, but I like to think that it's never too late. Even in terms of your marketing, or if you were doing an update to your game or project, it's still a really great time to try and do something new and unique to make you stand out. Often working with constraints can actually really help. You would think it would kind of be a hindrance, but it gives you a place to start from, and it kind of avoids the awful blank page syndrome. Constraints such as the platform that you're developing for, the type of game that you want to make, your release date, the type of audience you're aiming for, how big your team actually is, or how much funding you have to play with, can all be really valuable constraints that can help you shape something so you can build something within your means. I often think that sort of writing stuff down, old-fashioned pen and paper, rather than sitting in front of a computer screen, can often help the ideas flow better. And I think it's really good to just start writing stuff down. Don't kind of self-censor too much. Don't worry about it being stupid ideas, because anything you put down that's kind of a bad idea could easily inspire a better one. And then drawing can actually be really good for helping to inspire you as well, and to sort of come up with new ideas. Dave Perry gave a really good talk at the Develop conference a couple of years ago, where he stated how in the development of Earthworm Jim, they had a rule that whenever anyone had an idea, they had to sketch it out. So that not only helped with communication of the idea itself, but actually when someone was seeing you draw something, it might inspire something completely different in them. And that's kind of how they got so many cool, different, quirky ideas in the game. It's really important to take breaks from your project as well. Sometimes some time away can help you kind of see things more clearly and objectively. If you're a game developer, there's this great program called Stugan. So I was lucky enough to take part in it in 2015. It's actually running again at the moment. So you spend 2 weeks in the Swedish countryside working alongside other game developers, and could be a really good source of inspiration to be in different scenery and surrounded by different people, sort of working alongside 20 other devs can be really cool for getting feedback and sort of playing ideas off of each other. So good ideas always come from sort of thinking carefully, and often they can occur while you're doing other things. So it's often why, like, maybe when people are in the shower, often they can come up with some of their best ideas because your mind is sort of elsewhere and focusing on the routine, but then your subconscious is free to kind of whir away in the background and come up with some really interesting ideas. Same sort of thing when you're going to sleep. Your mind is disengaged and you're maybe not necessarily trying to think about that thing, but ideas are just popping up in your head. Can be really good to have a notepad by your bedside, just so you can write down stuff if anything springs to mind. And also other activities, especially exercise, like going for a walk or a run. Jonathan Blow really likes going dancing. He says that he takes a notepad with him, and at the end he's sort of scribbling stuff down. I think there's just something about being physical and also, engaging your mind with something else that can kind of help you come up with much better concepts than just sort of being sat around or staring at a screen can. It's also very valuable that you really want to come up with something new and different, and not just that you're sort of you're ordered to come up with something. It has to be something that you're really passionate about. Jonathan Blow kind of covered this in his Attempting Deep Work talk when he quoted Paul Graham, who is the founder of Y Combinator. And he stated, it's hard to do a really good job on anything that you don't think about in the shower, kind of showing that if you're passionate about this thing and you really care about it, then you're thinking about it all the time, not just sort of at your 9 to 5, and that's how you're going to come up with some of your best ideas for it. Also, through the actual act of creating your project, you're going to find lots of ideas are springing up. For game development, if the designer and implementer have sort of as close a line of communication as possible, then you're going to get the best concepts. And so often when it's the same person, it can work really well, because often as you're making things, you can kind of get inspired, sometimes accidentally, through the process of development. And also you can sort of play around with different experiments, things that might not go anywhere, and often really interesting stuff can come out of that. So sometimes when you're developing a game, you get really interesting bugs, like things that are going wrong with it, and then they can end up turning into features and things that you keep there. So for Lost Words, the game I'm working on at the moment, I started it off 4 years ago in the Ludum Dare Game Jam when the theme was minimalism. So I had an idea of making a game a bit like Tetris, but when you had words instead of blocks that you're dropping down the screen. So you had this quote at the top, and you have to drop the words in ascending length order so that you can jump up them with your character, which was just a Mario sprite, making this quickly in a weekend, and it was just me. And then when so you're trying to reach your goal at the end of the screen. But then when I actually started making it, I had some test text on the screen, and I had physics on the character, but not on the text yet. So when I ran the game, the character landed on the text and just stood there. And I thought, hey, that's really cool. Like, I've not seen that in a game before. And so I sort of decided to pivot and develop that as the idea instead of my original concept. And so that's become Lost Words now, so we've sort of changed lots of different elements about it, but a lot of the basics that I kind of put together in that demo are still there. So often working as part of a team can really help your creativity and innovation, because I often think if you have like a group of 5 people sort of coming up with stuff individually, they're going to come up with many more ideas and better ideas if they're sort of bouncing concepts off of each other and helping to develop each other's ideas and inspire each other. And you can draw your inspiration from anywhere. It's often really good to look outside of your own industry. One of the guys from Introversion gave a great talk where he was saying how on his holiday to San Francisco and doing a tour of Alcatraz, he was inspired for their title Prison Architect. Shigeratu Miyamoto was inspired by the beautiful countryside of Kyoto, where he grew up, for the Legend of Zelda series. And I love this quote from John Cleese, where he's stating that creativity is not a talent, it's a way of operating, because often people think, I'm not really a creative person and that's not my thing, but it's not something that you're like born with, it's kind of a way of thinking. So now we're going to look at 4 secrets for making great games. So to start off with, you need to identify what exactly it is that you want to make. So you want to look at the essence, and so what kind of experience you want the player to have, what do you want them to think and feel. Ryan Clark, who made Cryptid the Necrodancer, gave a great talk about game development and wrote an article looking at hooks, which are kind of the things that make your game stand out and they're unique. And he kind of applies this to trailers and games and lots of different areas. You also want to ask yourself why you're actually wanting to create this thing. Do you want to make people feel something? Do you want to entertain them or to educate them? And then that can kind of guide your development process. So secondly, you want to prototype things. So this allows you to kind of get a really good idea of what it is that you want to make early on and to test it out. Then allows you to iterate. So you've got something done, then you can make it better gradually. Working in an agile way, getting sort of a small section done as quickly as possible can reduce wasting time on something and sort of developing it really far along and then realizing it's not quite going in the right direction. Game jams are really cool for helping you prototype ideas. So we've got one running here, which is really cool, and the deadlines can be really, really helpful because often if you have a certain amount of time for a task, it can easily extend to fill that allotted time, so you can find out all tiny little details and extra things that you can do for it. Whereas if you just have, a day or a few hours, it's often surprising how much you can fit into that. Game jams are also really cool for teaching you new skills. And they allow you to make the impossible, putting a game together and getting something that people can play through, sort of a solid experience in a weekend is kind of crazy. Also means you get to meet all kinds of different people and learn from them, which is a really great experience. And lots of companies tend to use game jams because they've realized that they can sort of help teach the value of prototyping to their staff. They can help the company for proving out new concepts and figuring out what players might enjoy and giving something that you can actually test. And then they can actually inspire and motivate your staff. Sometimes too much, because people might think, hey, this is really cool. Look at what, just a team of like 2 of us did alone. Let's leave the nest and make our own titles. So then number 3 is playtesting. So you actually want to get your game out there and in front of people to see how it goes down. So it's important when you're doing this that you're sort of careful not to just listen to what people say, but actually closely observe them, sort of see what are they doing with their hands, how are they playing the game, are they doing it how you expected? Like if they say they enjoyed it, did they only play it for a really short amount of time, or did it look like they got really stuck on something? And so you can sort of tell a lot from just observation. Can often inspire new ideas. Sometimes people might make a really good suggestion to you when they're playing the game, or sometimes just the act of watching someone and sort of their expectations can trigger off new ideas. It's always really valuable to playtest sooner than you think. Often we all kind of want to make sure our project is really polished and people experience it in the best possible light. But if you wait until you feel that it's ready, then it's probably too late, because you've already spent a bunch of time and effort and money making things one way, and then when you play test it and you find out how fundamentally wrong you were about how people play things or what works and what doesn't, you're going to be throwing away a lot of stuff. Whereas if you're playtesting kind of when it's all grey box and really early, and even if you're having to explain things to people as they go, it's still so valuable for sort of figuring out the best way of doing things. You also want to playtest frequently. You don't just want to sort of have one massive session of playtesting and then that's it. You want to test, see what works, see what doesn't, put more of the good stuff in, take out the bad stuff, then test it on people again to see if the changes you've made have the effect that you thought they would. You also want to playtest on a diverse range of people. Sure, you want to playtest it on your target audience if you have one, but you also want to test on a bunch of other people. You might discover that you've got sort of a market of people who really love the experience that you never realized, or it might just teach you some really valuable stuff about the game. It's also really helpful for taking criticism, kind of seeing the things that people like and that they don't like, but you do have to be kind of careful, because as this comic from the Meatly shows, often people can kind of, you dismiss all the good feedback and you only really take the negative stuff to heart. Yeah. And if you're one of those people and that really motivates you and you can thrive off that, then great. But often people can kind of get dismayed, and so you don't want to be giving up on your project just because of a little bit of bad feedback. So then the final step is polishing, which is kind of a tricky one, because in game development and sort of any project, I think you're often very pushed for time towards the end, and it's tricky to make sure you get the amount of time that you need to make sure your experience is where it needs to be. And it's all those kind of fine little details that can take up lots of time. But it's so important because, it takes the game from a good game to a great game. I really like this quote from Tom Cargill. The first 90% of the code accounts for the first 90% of the development time. The remaining 10% of the code accounts for the other 90% of the development time. So, it's basically just illustrating that, all these final points just, it's important, but it does take up a whole load of time and effort. But when you get that right, then you can be left with a really amazing standout experience. So those are the 4 secrets to making great games. Identify the experience, prototype, playtest, and polish. I think every time I've made a game that it hasn't really been so good, it's kind of been because I've not done one of these right or for long enough. So creativity through productivity. There's a couple of different types of work, really. There's like deep work and shallow work. So shallow work is kind of the stuff that will stop you from getting fired, but deep work is the stuff that will get you promoted. So shallow work is things like answering emails and filling out forms, documents, meetings, all the kind of not so fun stuff, but things that has to be done. And then deep work is the kind of thinking about things, planning out stuff, coming up with different ideas, which is sort of really important as well, but it's easy for that stuff to get kind of shunted because of the other stuff that's quicker and easier to do. Another great quote from John Cleese stating, "It's easier to do trivial things that are urgent than it is to do important things that are not urgent, like thinking." And so I think this is kind of how we end up procrastinating. We're doing these small little things that kind of seem really important but aren't, and just keep on coming and coming. Whereas if you make sure you're sort of having time to do the deep work and the big and important things kind of first and foremost, then you can make sure you're moving your projects along in the right way. It's often good to take regular breaks as well. Some people think that your creativity can kind of tank after like 90 minutes if you're sort of sat trying to do one thing. So like saying earlier, sort of change of scenery or quick break can work well. So finishing projects, lots of people when they're doing hobby stuff, they'll sort of try things out and play around and then won't actually put it out there. They won't do that difficult end stage. But I think it is really important to try and do that, because you do learn so much from it. And it can be difficult to say when a piece of art is done and when you're ready to put it out in the world, as Leonardo da Vinci illustrated with his quotes, "Art is never finished, only abandoned." So I'm sure everyone kind of feels that really. Often when you put stuff out there's always these things that you want to do and make better, but you do have to find a time to draw that line, otherwise you're just going to be working on it forever. Austin Kleon recently posted this really cool life cycle of a project from Maureen McHugh. So it's kind of showing how, to begin with, everything is great. You think this project is going to be absolutely amazing, and then as you go, actually, it's harder than I thought. And then you get to the dark night of the soul that I'm sure everyone is familiar with, and then you realize actually I can learn some stuff from this. I can push through and get it done, and you get it out there. And sure, it's probably not exactly the thing that you kind of envisioned in your head, because it's so difficult to get that out there in the world. But what you do find is that the thing you put out there, like you're measuring that against the thing that you were originally thinking of, but everyone else in the world is measuring it against just what's there and the experience. So, you're going to be your own worst critic, really. So finally, 3 quick tools to help you innovate. So recently been reading a great book by Julia Cameron called The Artist's Way, where she talks about morning pages. So sort of every day, it's like a stream of consciousness thing. You're just writing stuff down. Whatever comes into your head, even if it's like, I can't think of what to write, you're just writing that out. She says you do 3 pages of that. And it's quite therapeutic. And also, there's a whole load of junk and things that kind of go around in our heads, but this sort of exercise will help you get it out there and down on the page, and writing it down helps you think about things and process them, and it can kind of really clear your head and free you up for great creative work. Another thing she suggests is artist dates, so kind of booking time in your own calendar. Because often life kind of gets in the way, and you're socializing, you've got family stuff, you've got other commitments, and it can be quite hard to find the time to work on that experimental thing that you just wanted to give a go, or learn this new thing. But actually, if you book something into your calendar, say like 2 hours on a Wednesday night, and then defend that section of your calendar, you can make sure that you get an opportunity to do those things that you always want to do, but are always putting off. Then Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. It's a really interesting book. It's got one section in it where he's talking about leadership, and I think that's important for creativity and innovation as well, because it's all very well and good to innovate on your own, but if you can inspire and motivate a team of people to do the same thing, then your project can be that much better. So a few of the points he goes over are being a just and understanding leader, paying attention to detail, and being cooperative with the team. So we've looked at the creative process, 4 secrets to making great games, creativity through productivity, and 3 tools to help you innovate, which are morning pages, artist dates, and leadership qualities. So I kind of sometimes measure the, you're looking at my life, you kind of, when you've worked on a whole bunch of games, you realize you only have a certain amount of time to work on these projects if you're spending a few years on each thing. So you kind of really want to make each project you work on count. Every creative endeavor you have, you really need to put 110% in and innovate, make it as different and stand out as you can. And I think we're in the creative industries have an excellent opportunity, and we're kind of privileged to be able to make experiences to put out there for people. Thanks very much. Shall I show the trailer and then we can ask a few questions? So I've got a quick trailer of Lost Words to show you guys. Hopefully we'll have some. Yeah, there we go. There's some sound as well. It's a platformer set in the pages of a diary, and you're using words to solve lots of different puzzles. So sometimes you're using them as platforms, but sometimes you're using the meaning of the words to help you in different ways. You can also make choices. So here we're using choosing the name of the protagonist for this fantasy world that we then transition into. So the fantasy world is kind of this girl who's writing the diary. She's using it to sort of overcome the issues she's going through in the real world. And you don't walk on the words here, but you do use them to interact with your environment in different ways. So we've got a new section of the game in. We're actually over on the booths over there if you want to come and check it out. Does anyone have any questions at all?
Don't be shy. We still have a lot of time, so it's your turn.
I meant to brief you all before the trailer to be thinking of questions, so you had a minute, but I forgot. So now you're
just raise your hand and I'll come with mic.
Anyone? There we go.
Do you do the 3 morning pager thing yourself? And if you do you write them down on a computer or do you use a notepad for that?
What was the beginning of the question? Sorry, do I do
the morning pages?
Right. So yes, I've been using. I started off with a like a hardback journal, and then I filled that up, and then I started just using bits of A4 pages. But it is a very difficult thing to do because it does take up quite a lot of time, and so I was doing it for quite a few months, and then I kind of cut down to 1 page rather than 3 because I found it was taking up too long. But it's definitely a really good exercise, and yeah, and I might try and up it again. But I think there's also lots of things, and everyone finds their own thing that really helps them, and it could be like going for a run or meditating or something that kind of helps you to clear your head and come up with ideas. But yeah, I think it's much better to write stuff down sort of physically rather than doing it on a computer.
Okay, anyone else? Well, I'll ask. Why have you decided to quit AAA production and switch for indie games?
So it was kind of a gradual thing because when I started working on the game in my spare time, after the game jam, I sort of liked the concept, and I showed my boss at the time, and he thought it was really cool and encouraged me to keep working on it. And so I kept making it, kept showing people, and then I kind of did this course called the Games Quarter. So it was like evening classes, and they kind of taught you about like the different areas of the games industry that you might not get experience with from your day-to-day stuff of like the legal side and accountancy. But then they also had, they had talks from pretty much every discipline, and it was just an interesting sort of extracurricular thing to do. And then at the end of the course, you had to either give a presentation about what you'd learnt, or you had to present your game. So I presented my game, and then there was someone from a game publisher on the course as well, and they were really interested in the game. So they offered us some funding, and we hadn't quite signed it yet, but they were kind of pushing me to quit my job, which I never normally, I'm a very sensible guy, and I probably would have been too sensible and boring to do something as extreme as quitting my job to go indie. But because we had this funding, it seemed like, it would be a good thing. And then when I quit my job, it didn't actually, it was something I'd done, and it wasn't actually that scary. And then I looked at the funding contract, and it kind of wasn't something I was quite happy with, and I thought we could probably get a better deal elsewhere. So I ended up turning down that funding and then pitching for other stuff, which was difficult, and it did take a while, but we managed to get some other funding in the end. It was kind of it was like a gradual thing, really.
Any other questions? Come on, guys.
Hi. I agree with everything you said. It's very close to the way we work as well. And my question is, so when the time comes for the project to be the dark night of the soul, and you're fully aware of it, and maybe you're in a leadership role, how do you stop people in your team freaking out?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and another tough one is how to know when you're actually in that stage, and whether you're in it's quite hard and it's getting a bit harder, or whether you're actually into the dark night of the soul, and then and how much further you have to go. But it's tricky. I guess you sort of pull together and try and help to inspire people, and I guess actually, if you can get feedback from people, sometimes that can be really helpful, because you're slaving away on this thing, and then if you can put it out there, in whatever way, like private or public, and actually see people enjoying it, that can be kind of really motivating and uplifting, and kind of help give you the enthusiasm to sort of push through the difficult times. But I'm sure you probably have some good advice on that as well. And Cool. Anyone else? Okay.
Okay, thank you for a talk.
Thanks very much.
You can go grab some refreshments, and we'll see you again in 20 minutes with another presentation.